anyone else in the business. And then for some reason, probably just youth, I went and did a strong buy on the initiation, which Michael made a bunch of his employees rich. I ended up making a bunch of the salespeople rich there at CSFB just as a result of riding on their coattails. But it was
The
quite.
90s were fun. The 90s were fun. I mean, stock went up 130,000%. We had 7 stock splits. 4
What was
kids,
the value of the company
born
when
in
you went
90s.
public? What was the total enterprise value or market cap when you went public, Michael?
It was like $150 million or something like that.
I mean, see, that's the beautiful thing. That's like, I mean, that is a Series A in venture capital.
It went up 100x after this initiation, like in the public business.
Yeah. So, Bill, I just need you to recommend our stock one more time. And then
There was an element that I think is super interesting, like that was also part of what Michael was referring to, but their inventory turns were so damn high compared to the rest of the industry. So they were building to individual customer order. They weren't building to inventory, they were building to demand. And because component prices fell so much, we calculated they got a 200 basis point gross margin advantage just by having the FIFO queue
Oh my
a
goodness,
lot
that makes
shorter.
sense. Yeah,
Exactly.
against-
just in time.
This was a structural competitive advantage. By the way, it still is. But so the point is that the cost of the materials are always coming down, and if your competitor has, let's say, 90 days of inventory in a series of queues with distributors and dealers, and you have 6 days of inventory, which we actually had for about 7 years in a row. 6 days of inventory. Think about that. It's a structural competitive advantage because you have fresher inventory, you have fresher costs, and of course you don't have all that capital tied up, and so your return on capital is essentially infinite, especially when you're paying your suppliers on a period longer than your customers pay you, and so you have a negative cash conversion cycle, which we still have typically around negative 50 days cash conversion cycle.
That's powerful.
It's a beautiful thing.
Yes, it is. Well, let's transition from 32 years ago to the present.
Cash is king. Everything else is an opinion.
No doubt. So you two just had a big win with this Invest America program that was just announced as part of the big bill. And I know that, Brad, this was your baby. You spent a ton of time on it, but Michael came on board and helped out as well. So why don't you tell everyone the details? We've talked about it before, but tell them the details of what landed.
Yeah, well, thanks. And I remember last 4th of July, we were talking about this bill, and I was sitting right here, and honestly, I thought the chance of getting this passed into legislation was, maybe 10% at best. And we had some good fortune. As you know, the legislation was called the Invest America Act. It was a bipartisan standalone bill, and it ended up, like a lot of other pieces of legislation, getting subsumed by the reconciliation bill, right? So a lot of these things got packaged together in this one bill, and of course it was signed into law on July 4th down at the White House. I've been at this 4 years. I tried to get it done under Biden, but the stars just aligned in this moment. And Michael was pretty early to get on board and support this, joined the CEO Council for Invest America, but played a critical role with the president to help get it into the reconciliation bill over the course of the last 60 days. But let's just talk about exactly what it means now that it's become law. So I think of this as a pretty significant evolution in the social contract. It creates private investment savings accounts, privately owned for every child at birth, seeded with $1,000 in the S&P 500. So parents, companies, philanthropists can add money. Anybody can add money to these accounts. You can't take the money out of the accounts, right? It just compounds in the S&P 500 until you're 18 years old. So We will spend the next year putting the program in place. It has to be launched under the terms of the legislation by July 4th, 2026, the 250th birthday of America. And basically, we got it expanded so all kids under the age of 18, that's 65 million kids, are eligible. And I give a lot of credit to Senator Cruz, who fought to expand the pool of eligibility here. So what that means is that they can open up an account, but only children born after January 1, 2025 get the $1,000 from Treasury, right?
The others will have an account that someone else could put money on their behalf.
And they can add money to it. There are a lot of advantages for their parents adding money, for companies adding money to it. So it makes a lot of sense. And for Michael and I think the key performance indicator here is if we're having this conversation a year from now, we want to have 50 or 60 million kids signed up. Now, of course, if your child is born after July 4th of 2026, then they're going to automatically get an account set up when they get their Social Security number, and they will automatically get the $1,000. But we have this one-time group, all kids under the age of 18. We're going to have a big campaign to get all those folks signed up over the course of the next year. And I guess for me, I was reflecting on this over the course of the last few days. And, at a time when you have an avowed socialist like Mamdani, winning the primary in New York, it seems like, the Invest America Act is really just the exact opposite, right? You're both trying to attack the problem of the wealth gap. But this is by getting everybody into the game of capitalism, making everybody actual owners in the upside of America's success, rather than resorting to price controls, attacking businesses and success, and creating really more dependency on government. So I think we're at this critical crossroads in America, and I think the Invest America Act comes at an important point in time. I think a lot of people think of it like a 529 account bill, but I think that dramatically underestimates what this is. This is a lifetime investment account, so they can compound over the course of your life. If you start with $1,000 and you add $750 per year, at 18 that's worth $50,000, at 30 that's worth $170,000, and at 50 it's worth $1 million, right? So it really is a platform for unlocking dramatic compounding and savings in the upside of capitalism from birth. And it wouldn't have happened without Michael.
Well, and Brad, look, you deserve 99.9% of the credit, so I'm going to give it to you. You really drove this thing passionately for several years, and it's amazing that it got done. I do think you'll see many companies provide matching contributions, and a number of companies have already said they're going to do that, and it'll be like a benefit. Come work at our company and have a kid, and your child will get this, and it's just going to be super easy for anyone to add to those accounts. I think it's also a chance to teach every child about financial literacy and about capitalism and free markets, and look up in 15 or 18 years and you've got 70 million kids with these accounts. I also think you're going to have philanthropists. Susan and I will definitely be a part of that will say, hey, this is a really good way to get money directly to the next generation in a way that is going to compound and have a difference in their life. Our foundation has studied this very carefully, and we believe it's worthy of a significant contribution. And Brad's been working with the Treasury Department and others to set this up so that any philanthropist would be able to say, hey, here's a zip code, here's a county, here's a state, here's a group of kids that I'd like to help. I don't know who they are exactly, but I want to help them, and I want to help their future. I think you'll see a lot of philanthropists get very excited about this. I've had a discussion with a number of them, and this could be a major platform for philanthropy in our country.
And just to put a sharper lens on that, Michael, they might back every kid in the state, or
Yeah,
everyone
exactly.
in the nation on a year, or
Yeah,
just
adopt the state, adopt a series of zip codes. I think, again, it'll be a platform for philanthropy.
Yeah, I think of it, Bill, in some ways like the Giving Pledge 2.0. I mean, we've had massive wealth creation in this country, like unprecedented wealth creation in this country, right? But one unique feature of America that I don't think there's any other civilization in history that you can point to, okay, that has this character, which is the super wealthy in America, by and large, want to give away the vast majority of their wealth during their lifetime or shortly after they die. I certainly know that Michael's in that group. Okay, think about this. In Europe, right, they invented generation skipping trusts. It was about coming up with legal mechanisms for creating dynastic wealth so as to not give any of your money away, okay? And we have a culture in this country where people want to give away large sums of money. The challenge is the charitable infrastructure has not necessarily scaled to meet the needs of people who want to give away billions of dollars at a time. And I asked Michael and Susan a question over a year ago. I said, if you wanted to give away a lot of money in the state of Texas today, like, how would you do it directly to kids? And there's not a good answer, right? Because there's not a financial infrastructure in place that has a set of rules associated with it, where you could have somebody like the Treasury Department. We're going to have a pooled Invest America account at Treasury where Michael and Susan or other philanthropists could give money to this pooled account, and it would be dispersed to all these kids' accounts, subject to all the rules and regulations of use, so the kids can't take the money out, but they can see it compound. That simply does not exist today. It's impossible to do that at scale today. And at the long end of the curve, if you think about, my family as an example, we do a lot with the East Palo Alto School District, some of these low-income school districts in the state of California, where I could just adopt that school and say, for every kid in that school, I'm going to give $1,000 a year to. So this unlocks, I think, massive creativity, Michael, around philanthropy, and that's what I mean. What we know in Silicon Valley, if you build an open platform, 1 million applications can bloom. 1 million ideas can be built on top of this. I mean, we've heard from states that want to add $10,000 for every kid born in the state if they graduate from high school in the state. So I think we haven't even scratched the surface of the beautiful competition and the beautiful philanthropy and the long tail of philanthropy, churches and parents and friends that will be able to give to these accounts. And so our job is to make sure that we make it as frictionless as possible, that we work, and that's one of the core things that we're doing.
And what you're describing, those accounts don't solely take money at the initiation. They can take money all along the way, which is how you could support a school or something like that.
Correct. So the way it works, Bill, is and all of this, I mean, Michael and I think, learned a lot about the act of legislation going through this, because, it's one thing to get it put in the reconciliation bill. It's one thing to get high-level buy-in. But just in the last 2 weeks, we were negotiating the nitty-gritty. I think this was 23 pages of tax, changes in the reconciliation bill associated with the Invest America Act. So families can give, or recipients can receive up to $5,000 a year from family, from friends, etc. Companies can give $2,500 a year per recipient, tax-free, so pre-tax. So Dell Corporation, for example, has raised their hand and said, we intend to give to the kids of our employees. So has Uber, so has NVIDIA, so has Oracle, so has Salesforce, so has T-Mobile, so has iHeartMedia. So, it's an incredible list that has already come together. And we're going to go to the business roundtable. We're going to go to the largest companies in America, and we're going to ask them all to do it. Now, we're not telling them the amount they need to give. All we're saying is give an amount that's appropriate to your company and to your employee base. I just heard from Tony yesterday at DoorDash. He retweeted something about this. Sam Altman, I heard from over the weekend, once he heard it was passed, retweeted something about this. So I think the business enthusiasm is going to be very big and substantial. But remember, the most powerful givers are moms and dads grandparents, friends, birthdays, and bar mitzvahs, and all of those dollars ultimately don't really generally find a home for savings and compounding. And we're going to make it as easy as Venmoing in this money, Apple paying money in. And one of the studies that we did that was really profound in partnership with the Milken Institute, they found a whole host of things. One was that low-income cohorts tend to save at about the same rate as higher-income cohorts if they have an account. The problem is that nobody in a low-income cohort has a savings account or investment account. So I think you're going to see, a lot of giving, a lot of contribution by all sorts of folks once we set this up. We also learned that once we do this, kids are more likely to graduate from high school and college, more likely to start a business, more likely to buy a home, less likely to be incarcerated. So I think the societal ROI of this will be really large over time.
And it sounds like you're going to try and find a way where if someone wanted to donate, Michael mentioned zip codes, but some other way that if people wanted to just target the low income, most needy, that there'll be a way to do that. Is that right?
This was a really important issue to Michael and to myself, and I'll just give you a bit of a window into the weeds. We tried to get household income as one of the targeting mechanisms, and we weren't able to get bipartisan agreement on that. But we were able to get a proxy for that, which is you can target by zip codes. So you can target down to groups of 5,000 or more by zip code. And we think through that geo-targeting. So, for example, Michael could target the Rio Grande Valley. I could target, East Oakland. So there are zip codes that you can target that I think certainly include a predominance of lower income households.
That's fantastic.
Hey, Bill, I know you've been involved in financial literacy and education for a long time. Tell us about the organization you're partnering with, and perhaps as a kind of a potential partnership for Invest America.
Yeah, my wife and I have been giving to an organization called Next Gen Personal Finance. There's a gentleman there named Tim Ranzetta who has just been pushing for financial literacy in high school. So we can add a link in here, but from 2021 to 2025, in only a 4-year window, we've gone from 11 states to 29 states. And Texas just passed this very recently, a few weeks ago. And so the idea, which sounds obvious, it's actually quite shocking that it's not true, is just to add a semester of financial literacy to the high school curriculum. We send kids out to get jobs, and we haven't taught them, how credit cards might take advantage of them, and how to build a monthly budget, and how to use a checkbook, and how to plan. And so I think these two things complement each other quite a bit. But that's another movement that it's nice to see gaining momentum simultaneously with this one.
Yeah, it's I talked to Tim. Texas just became, like you said, 29th state, I think, to require a semester of financial literacy education. And some people said, the Treasury Department, Invest America, they're not going to own the financial literacy. What again, I think when you create a platform of ownership, now it makes all of these financial literacy programs and organizations across the country just way more effective, right? Because when you're talking to a kid who actually, you say, open up your Invest America account on your phone, let's talk about how you got $12,000, $14,000 into that account. Let's look at how it's compounded. Let's talk about what it means to own the companies that are listed there, what it means to be a shareholder. I think you just have a much more engaged student, right? Because today, 95% of those students don't own anything, and they look at their parents, and their parents don't really own things. And so it's a lot harder to get motivated to learn about something when you don't think you're going to have the prospect of ownership. There are so many great organizations like Tim's out there, and I look forward to seeing how they take this platform and run with it to turbocharge their own efforts.
Brad, I know you wanted to mention the budget deficit and the funding for this program and put it in a little bit of perspective, just with all the talk and concern about how big the budget deficit is.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we've had a huge debate among our friend group about this, and some of my friends were even critical that this is part of the problem, if you will. So to break this down, the max cost of this is $3.7 billion a year. We have 3.7 million kids born every year. If you give them each $1,000, that's $3.7 billion. So just to kind of put that in context, $3.7 billion is about what we give to Afghanistan and Nigeria in the terms of foreign aid every year. So I think one of the things as a country we just have to ask is about priorities. Is it more important to give every kid in America a private investment account, a little seed from birth, and get them on the right track, or to give $3.5 billion to Afghanistan and Nigeria? And I think those are the type of choices we're going to be forced to make. And I'm not saying that the dollars going to Afghanistan and Nigeria are wasted, but we make these decisions every single day in our budget. And so for me, this is, that's one angle. The second angle is just as a percentage of our national revenue, this is 1/100th of 1% of our national revenue. So it's pretty inconsequential in terms of the overall budget. But the final point on it is, as you've heard me argue, according to the studies that were done on this will actually be revenue contributing 20 to 30 years out, because the taxes you have to pay when you exit the accounts on the capital gains will be more than what the government is contributing on an annual basis into the accounts. And so among the things we should be worried about when it comes to the budget, I don't think this is one of them. However, I would say unquestionably that I remain as concerned about the budget deficit as ever. And I've been a supporter of a balanced budget amendment for a long time. I happen to think that this is something that is aligned with that, not at odds with that. Making every kid a capitalist from birth is going to better align us with the policies that allow the country to continue to grow. And I think growth is a critical element to making sure that we get our deficit to GDP back in a manageable place. Michael, I know you care a lot about that issue. Any other thoughts on that particular point?
Yeah, I mean, government's obviously been spending too much, and there's been some renewed attention and focus on that. That's a good thing. It gets priced into the currency, right? And we see it in all the effects, whether it's inflation or the value of the currency. And you can't really escape that. I think the spending has to come under control. Now maybe we get this incredible productivity lift. I'm sure we're going to talk about that as we get to the AI fund portion here. But we shouldn't be spending so much more than we're taking as a government. I've sort of stepped back from the hysterics and say we don't have a loan to value problem as a country. We have a spending problem.
Talk to us about that. I want to dig into that because it's a really important point. Talk about loan to value. When you say loan to value, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, what I mean is the value, loan to value is a common term and phraseology used in banking and credit markets, and essentially refers to the amount of a loan relative to the value that it's being borrowed upon. And if you think about the deficit, as against the value of all the assets in the United States, we don't have a loan to value problem.
Right.
And of course,
so the total value of all the assets in the United States are a couple hundred trillion. Our annual deficit is $2 trillion. So you would look at that and say, as a loan to value, that's not an issue at all.
Well, I would look at the total deficit as against the total value of the assets. Now you'd have to
36 trillion of debt against 200 plus trillion of assets.
Right. Now you have to take into account private assets and private debt also. So it would be a different equation there. But also the government has taxing authority, and so it could increase the taxes. But net it all out, the government shouldn't be spending what it's spending relative to what it takes in. And there's many ways to address that. But we should should be worried about where the deficit is and the rate of increase.
Let me ask you a question about that. Well, first, maybe to level set. So the argument out of the White House is that the reconciliation bill cuts the deficit. So the deficit was about 1.9 trillion. Their argument is that it cuts the deficit by about 150 billion a year, so 1.5 trillion over 10. Okay, and then they also argue you get another $250 billion in tariff revenue, incremental from the start of the year. Right? We saw that in the run rate revenue in the month of May. So you add those two things together, now you're at 400 billion. So if you're at 1.9 trillion deficit, now you're down to about 1.5 trillion dollar deficit. By my math, that drops it to about 5% deficit to GDP. Bessent has said he will get it to 3% deficit to GDP, which is what most people say is, reasonably healthy. I think people would like to, not have any at all, but I think most people view 2 to 3% as reasonable. He thinks he can get there by 27 or 28 through the two things I just mentioned, right? Tariff revenue and the deficit reduction in the reconciliation bill, plus an incremental 100 to 200 basis points of growth in the country caused by, lower taxes, less regulation, AI productivity, etc. So, is your view that we just have to wait and see? Does that show up or does it not show up?
Well, obviously, we have to wait and see. I think on the trade and tariffs front, I think this is very tricky, right? We have products flowing back and forth, and we have services flowing back and forth. And if you think about, the market cap of the U.S. companies versus the rest of the world, hey guys, U.S. is doing really well relative to the rest of the world in market cap. And the reason is that we have a substantial lead in the most valuable industries in the world.
Correct.
And so the issue there is that if you think about the trade in products, you also have to think about the trade in services, and how that's going to be dealt with in a negotiation. I don't know how they'll all get sorted out, but I don't think it's a simple one line item fix.
Right. No, I think it's it's all relevant right now. Elon's talking about forming a third party, the American Party, really in response what appears to be frustration over Doge and the budget deficit and the concerns by folks like Ray Dalio about a debt spiral in the United States. You got guys like Scott Bessent saying, Elon, you catch rockets, leave the finances to me. Bessent seems very confident that he's going to get this back down to 2 to 3% deficit to GDP. I actually like the suggestion, Bill, by DeSantis. Rather than forming a third party, which seems to me just chaotic and a lot of overhead and has not historically been that successful, I would love to see Elon, if this is his main issue, if it's the budget deficit and debt, which I would love to see him take on, right? He could do a series of things. Number one, he could really sponsor a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution of the United States under Article 5. If he put $10 billion against that effort, it would be the single largest constitutional effort in the history of the country. I think there's broad bipartisan support for a balanced budget amendment. We have 32 states that have supported this in the past. I think you only need 34 to get it constitutional convention called, 38 states to get it ratified. It hasn't happened. The founders made it hard to amend the Constitution for a reason, but I actually think if he put those type of dollars and that type of focus behind it, we could get it done. And then on top of that, he could target both Democrats and Republicans in primaries around this issue. And to me, it just seems like that targeted approach, that very focused approach, to balancing the budget would have all sorts of positive impacts. Number one, it keeps the country focused on this issue. It keeps this administration focused on this issue. And, I think you have an outside chance at getting a constitutional amendment. And you certainly are going to have a lot of Republicans and Democrats who will run on that issue if they think they'll get, Elon's support. So I'm not sure how this will all evolve, whether there's going to be a third political party or not. But I would love to see this issue get dealt with. I remember Ross Perot tackling it 1992, 1991, Michael. I know you knew Ross, and
Yep.
To me that type of attention is the type of attention that we're going to need. Why don't we shift gears here for a second? This one I've been dying to ask you both about. There's this really unprecedented war for AI talent going on. And it was kicked off by Zuckerberg and Meta. They made the acqui-hire of Scale for $15 billion. They brought on board Alexander Wang, to help lead that effort. Then they brought on board Nat Friedman and Daniel Gross. They poached a bunch of people from OpenAI, a bunch of people from Google, and now today another announcement of somebody from Apple. The talk is $75 to $100 million annual pay packages, massive signing bonus, really dollar amounts, Michael and Bill. I've never heard of, in the tech industry. So, Bill, given that recent set of facts, what is this? Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? What do you think the downstream implications of this are?
Well, I would back up a little bit. I don't think it started with Meta. I think it started with the cycle that we've been under in the private funding market. We saw some of this stuff during CERT, but we've moved to a world, and I talk about this in detail on O'Shaughnessy's podcast if someone wants to go listen to it from a few weeks back. But we've evolved to a place where when there's a successful company, the late stage private market writ large tries to shovel feed cash into it. And so we have private companies that have raised not just 100 million, but $1 billion or more. And we have a handful of private companies, including OpenAI, who are voracious and audacious enough to burn $2, 3, 4, $5 billion a year. And so you start doing that, and you create a situation where private companies, and we saw this a lot during CERT, but private companies have an odd advantage against public companies in that their investors are more willing to let them lose a lot of money than the public investors may be willing to. And so they get bold and they get audacious. And, OpenAI, Anthropic, they were all paying people tons of money before Meta did this. They were paying them $10 million a year, maybe a smaller than you were talking about, but they were doing it. And they were providing liquidity earlier, like 2 years in instead of waiting for 4. And liquidity is a private company and all of these things, which in some cases may have let these people leave because they didn't have any lock-in. So that part may have backfired. But in Zuck, you have someone who's had his back against the wall a couple of times and gotten bold and changed what he was doing and succeeded again. And so he has conviction that he's willing to take a big bet. I think he's very willing to look at cost as a percentage of his market cap and to view risk as spending against a percentage of his market cap. Not everyone's capable of doing that. I think it may be the right math, actually, in terms of how big a bet he wants to make. But yeah, what he has done here in the past few weeks is an experiment that's never been tried before. But there's unlimited free agency in business, unlike sports, and he just went and bought the 27 Yankees, of AI.
Yeah, and I think your point is a great one. And listen, we're shareholders in Meta, we're shareholders in OpenAI. I wouldn't be a shareholder in Meta if I didn't think, in fact, I remember back in 22 when we took our big position there, and people said to me, "Oh, what are you doing? This is a founder-controlled controlled company. He's never going to become more efficient. He's never going to do these things. I said, the whole reason I want to be all in on this company is it's founder control. I think it is a massive advantage that he has today, right? And he's talking about risking 1% of his company, right, in order to reboot around AI. That seems to me to be a very, very rational economic decision. And there's no, this is just a talent war. He's got to, Llama 4 was not where it needed to be to compete heads up. But he has one advantage none of those other companies have. He has the world's biggest printing press, shooting out billion-dollar bills, right? He's not relying on the beneficence of venture capitalists. The guy has a business model that is generating the cash to fund all this, and so he's leveraging that cash as a source of competitive advantage, which seems to me to make a lot of sense. I think it's going to make it very difficult. That's why I was asking about the downstream implications, Bill. If you're a company that's trying to compete against that, I don't think many venture companies can compete against that on a durable long-term basis.
Yeah,
and certainly not the real startups.
Yeah, I was having a discussion with a real AI startup founder this weekend, and he was asking about talent, and I don't know what you do. I mean, I don't think you hire anyone that's top 1,000 in the Bay Area. You won't be able to afford it. But I do think there is a fundamental question, because it's easy to say, and I want to get Michael's opinion on this, it's easy to say the percentage of market cap and make that bold decision. But there are cultural implications, right?
Yes.
Of bringing in employees that make radically different amounts of money than the other employee base. How do you think that will be? How difficult will that be to manage?
I think it'll be a challenge culturally, for sure. He could have a long line outside of a store with people, wanting this or complaining about that, and that could be a distraction. So I think people generally have a sense of fairness, right? And they want to be treated fairly relative to others and relative to the opportunities that they have out there in the overall market. And if they feel that they're not being treated fairly, that's going to be a problem. So I don't know how that gets sorted out. I do think the math could work for them, given everything you guys just talked about. And obviously, if you reduce this down to a race to super intelligence or something along those lines, the size of the prize is tremendous. And they do have an incredible business that is aided by these advancements in a big way, and there aren't a whole ton of companies that can go do this.
Yeah, and by the way, Brad, you mentioned that they have this unfair advantage with this huge printing press, but Apple and Google have the same exact printing press and chose not to do this.
Yeah, but neither of them are controlled by founders. And that's the point I was trying to make. These are the type of bets that I think it's very, very difficult for a Google or an Apple to make, for the reasons you mentioned, Bill. Can they sell it to the public markets? Do they have the type of decision making in the boardroom that allows this to occur? I mean, at the end of the day, I think at Meta, if Zuckerberg wants to do it, that's what's happening. And that board, it gets on board. In fact, he's reshaped the board over the course of the last couple of years with folks who are, I think, signed up for this mission with him. And Michael, to your point, that's why I think he reorganized this into the kind of super intelligence division. I think the way they'll try to manage this culturally is to say, listen, there's going to be an elite SEAL Team 6 group, which is called super intelligence, and we're going to pay them elite pay because it's good for the entire business. That doesn't mean we're going to inflate everybody else. And in fact, what I think that Meta will do is, you'll probably see them rolling back like you see with Microsoft, like you see with Amazon. My sense is that companies are generally going to get smaller, right, on the backs of the productivity gains from AI, but they'll redeploy some of those profits into these areas. If you're in the model business and you want to be on the frontier, competing in the front, for super intelligence, and there are only 5 to 7 companies that really are in that game. then I think you're going to have something similar. Now, in the case of OpenAI, it's only 2,800 employees, and they're all part of that division effectively. But you have to really get scale quickly, because if you're not bringing in 10, 20, 30, 40 billion dollars of annual revenue, I don't think you can stay in this game. And so the question is whether or not Anthropic and X and OpenAI have a sufficient escape velocity, right, that they can take on this frontal assault by Meta and still compete. My sense is OpenAI does. My sense is both of those companies do, but it's not a long list that can compete with them.
And by the way, the Nat Friedman edition was particularly interesting, just with his GitHub background. You know, we had talked in the past that Meta had made a couple of hires on the enterprise side, and we'd heard rumors of, you know, certain payments when they pass through the cap on the open models. But, you know, you have to wonder with Nat coming on board if there are more aspirations on the enterprise side.
Yeah, it's a great point. And certainly want to create some optionality there. Hey, Michael, question for you. You know, on this related topic of productivity gains from leveraging AI and kind of what you're seeing at Dell. We've talked on this podcast what we call the golden age of margin expansion. You know, this idea that you're seeing AI is certainly reaccelerated your top line in a pretty dramatic way, but it's doing that at a lot of companies. At the same time, you're able to do more with less. Is that overstated, or do you think that we're in this phase over the next 3, 4, 5 years where generally as an economy, and certainly within a lot of companies, that they're going to be able to, you know, have their top lines grow faster than their operating costs because of AI?
It's absolutely real, Brad, and we are doing it. We know of other companies that are doing it, and I think you know, maybe only 10% of companies, large companies, have figured this out, and the other 90% are sort of a bit confused at this point. But you know, if I step back and look at this, you know, 10% productivity improvements, pretty easy. 20%, you know, reasonably common. Sightings of 30% or 40%. Those are massive numbers. If you sort of step back and you think about this, you know, you got a $114 trillion global economy, right, in 2025, and services economy is 2/3 of that. You know, if we believe that a 10% improvement is possible in productivity, if you just keep it simple, you say 10% improvement, that's worth $10 trillion, right? And so the amount of investment that is occurring today in AI could be quite a bit less than is really justified. I mean, if we believe in a 10 to 20% improvement, and I don't say that lightly, because that's like an enormous thing if it were to occur. But let's just stick with this for a second. If we had a 10 to 20% improvement, the investment in AI should be more on the order of $2 to $4 trillion
per year.
Yeah, and that's not where we are. Right. It's a lot less than that. So, you know, I don't want to get too ahead of myself here, but I do think there is a big change that is occurring, and we're just at the beginning of it, and it's going to affect every part of our world.
Well, you have particular standing here, Michael, right? You saw the productivity gain that came from a computer on every desktop. You saw the productivity gain.
Yeah, that was the 90s. We were talking about that. Exactly. The 90s. That was fun.
You saw the productivity gain from the internet. And now you're 2 years into observing this. Are the productivity gains from this going to be as big or bigger than what we saw from personal computers and the internet?
Oh, it's far bigger. It's far bigger. Yeah, I feel 98% confident that it's far bigger than the PC.
What about the internet? What about the internet?
Yeah, I mean, so of course all these build on each other, right? Yes. It's compounding, but this is bigger because it is essentially all knowledge work. and I think it's an expansion of the pie, right? It's really easy to figure out what will be more efficient and how you can reduce costs. But if you go back 20 years ago, it was very hard to see where the new jobs would be. I think we're in a similar situation here as well. I do think it will be expansionary for the overall economy and for prosperity and for well-being and human potential broadly across all domains, whether it's in education, health, societal outcomes, etc. But yeah, this feels bigger.
I remember in 2001, 2002, Michael, some companies that were early to, for example, Google, they figured out how to gain, I think of Booking.com, right? They figured out how to arbitrage the internet and Google to build this giant business, right? And so I would say, they figured out productivity gains before the next person, and that was hugely advantageous. And when you say that only 10% of companies are leveraging this today, it kind of sounds like the same thing. Like the early companies are really there, but there's a huge amount yet to come.
Well, I think about the big companies in the world. I'm talking like 10 billion plus revenue companies. 50 billion, 100 billion plus revenue companies. These companies have an incumbency of sorts, right? They have data, they have customers, they have brands, they have IP, etc. But if they don't move quickly to reimagine their businesses, given all this technology, they will be destroyed by new companies that come in with a totally clean slate, and that's, you can already see signs of that happening. So I think this is all going to play out, in the next 3 to 5 years, and it will become sort of an urgent priority for companies to reimagine themselves. And what we've done at Dell is our team knows this because we talk about it all the time internally. I think it was almost 2 years ago, I stood up in front of a group of our leaders and I said that 5 years from then, that would be 3 years from now, we are going to have a new competitor, and that new competitor is going to be in every business that we're in, except they're going to be faster and more efficient and more capable. They're going to put us out of business. And the only way we're going to prevent that is we're going to become that company. and this is how we're going to do it. And I sort of laid out our best guess as to how to do that, 2 years ago. We're pretty far, into that path and well on our way, and it's working. But it's not an easy thing to do, right? This is sort of gut-wrenching stuff to reinvent, reimagine. We've had to do it many times. If you don't do it, you just go out of business. So, and that's no fun. So we're not doing that. And not everybody wants to do it, right? It's
true.
It's hard.
Yeah. I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit. So your server division is your fastest growing division. We've talked about on this podcast some of the big wins you've had as part of large AI clusters. How did you get Dell in a position to be part of that next wave, and what's the key value add from your products in those large deployments?
Yeah, so last year our server networking business grew 58% year over year. In the first quarter, we received $12.1 billion in AI orders.
Wow.
And by the way, our shipments for all of last year in AI servers were about $10 billion. So we had
2 years ago,
billion.
2 years ago were $2 billion.
Yeah, it was not very much 2 years ago. So we took orders in the first quarter for over 12 billion, and last year we shipped about 10 billion. So this is growing super fast, and now we have a backlog of a little over 14 billion. So what happened? Well, we were already leader in servers. we kind of saw the GPU thing, and it's a combination of things. I mean, when NVIDIA releases a reference design, it's kind of a reference design. It doesn't really work. We love NVIDIA, but somebody's got to make all this stuff, and so we tons of engineering, and obviously there's logistics, the supply chain, building these 100,000 plus GPU clusters and making them work reliably is super complex. So it's a combination of engineering, operations. We often will help with the financing of these with our Dell Financial Services, and the scale of these things is enormous. I mean, right? We talked about this at Dell Tech World. I mean, right now we're deploying these systems that will produce, deliver more than 50 trillion tokens per month. And if you put that in the context of Google statements or Microsoft statements, I mean, this is massive scale systems. And I don't think there are a ton of companies that are able to do this and have it work reliably.
And Jensen has said, you guys have distinguished yourself against your competitors, other ODMs like Foxconn or Quanta, etc. You've been first to market. You're launching the GB300s right now. You're partnering.
Yeah, we
with
delivered
NVIDIA.
the first GB300s a couple days ago to CoreWeave. We announced that. We actually have delivered another GB300 system to another customer. I don't think we've disclosed who that is yet, but informed listeners of this podcast can probably guess.
So the thing that I'm, a year ago we were all sitting around and talking about the ups and downs of the overbuild in 2000, right, around the internet, and and yet when I look at the trajectory that we're on. Right, I saw Mike Intrator on CNBC today, and he said, "Listen, we're still underestimating the amount of demand that's out there in the world." And when he says it, or when you say it, or when Jensen says it, in some ways, people would argue it's self-serving. Of course, you guys are going to say that. That's your business. You're gonna tell everybody your business is great, but you're known as a very sober guy who tells it like it is. And what I want you to do is reflect a little bit on the comparison between this and the period in early 2000 when we did get overbuilt, right? And as the saying goes, every shortage ends up in a glut. Why are we not near that point yet today in this market?
Well, I mean, you guys as students of the market can go back and sort of review what the multiples were on earnings and cash flow, around that time. We're nowhere near that for the most part.
Right.
But if we go back to the underlying activity here, it's all about the tokens, right? And as we go from basic queries to test time compute to deep reasoning to agents and multi-agent systems, the number of tokens just explodes. And what are we talking about in tokens? When we're talking about tokens, we're talking about knowledge, right? And
Exactly.
I don't know about you, but I'm using these tools like 50 times a day as my thought partner to solve problems and quench my curiosity. And my usage is skyrocketing, and often multiple models, and it's going out there and querying all these websites, doing calculations for me, and helping me solve problems faster than I ever could in the past. And I think it's just at the beginning, right? And the substrate for all of this, of course, is compute and data, right? So we love that. at Dell Technologies because that's what we do. And
Right.
so there's just a ton of growth here. I think it will also be highly distributed. I think it will be, it'll occur in devices, it'll occur in the edge, it'll occur, in all sorts of places. And it does feel like we're still a lot closer to the beginning here.
What can you share about on-prem AI deployments, Michael? Are you seeing anything interesting there?
Yeah, so we in the last year, delivered a little over 3,000 of these Dell AI factories, and